Welcome, curious soul, to Tales of the Tattered Book. I am your host, the keeper of the book. With each passing moment, new horrors appear on these weathered pages, yearning to be told. As I open this arcane tome, remember, knowledge comes at a price, and some truths are better left unspoken. Tonight, dear listeners, the Tattered Book reveals a tale of transformation. Among its weathered pages, we find a story of how darkness answers prayers that heaven refuses to hear. Steel yourself, for in the confession, we learn that some sins aren't meant to be forgiven, but embraced.
Thomas Shaw hadn't always been a cruel man. Even now, as he lifted the bottle to his lips in the most remote corner of his local pub, something in him remembered gentler days. But lately, whispers plagued his drinking hours, a voice like smoke and shadow that turned his thoughts toward darker places.
You know she looks at you with pity, doesn't she?
The voice would murmur.
Your own wife, thinking herself better than you.
Each night, the voice grew stronger, and with each drink it made his fists clench tighter. The thing in the shadows watched, patiently, testing, not Thomas, but her. All she needed was a little guidance. Inspector Morris shielded his lantern against the bitter October wind as he approached St. Michael's steps. The ancient cathedral loomed before him, its spires piercing the cloud-laden sky. 2 constables flanked the heavy oak doors, their faces pale in the flickering gaslight.
5 bodies in 3 months, sir, all bearing the same markings.
Constable Reed reported, his breath showing in the cold air. Morris had seen those markings himself, black veins spreading across the victim's skin like ink bleeding through parchment. First, the husband, that one they'd almost ruled as natural causes. Then the widow from Cherry Lane, followed by the seamstress from Bridge Street. Last week, the banker's wife was found in her garden, and just yesterday, the young priest from St. Catherine's parish. Each death more grotesque than the last, as if whatever killed them was evolving its craft.
And the witness claims she saw someone enter here tonight?
A woman dressed all in black, sir. The peculiar thing is,
Reed paused.
he mentioned that the doors to the church were locked from the inside.
As if in response, a scream echoed from within the church, not of terror or pain, but triumph.
Dear God.
3 months earlier.
Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been 2 weeks since my last confession.
The words escaped through the grated window like a final breath, barely audible in the stale air of the confessional. Agnes watched her wedding ring catch the light of dying candles, its gold band now tarnished despite her constant polishing. How many times had she poured her heart out through this grating? How many confessions had she made, seeking forgiveness for thoughts that only grew more twisted with each passing night?
In nomine Patris, speak your sins, child. What's troubling you?
It's my husband, Father, the drinking. It's gotten worse. Last night
Her fingers brushed the collar of her dress, beneath which yellowed bruises mapped a constellation of cruelty.
I pray for strength, but lately, I've begun to question if God hears me at all.
The priest's robes rustled softly as he leaned closer to the partition, his voice dropping to a contemplative, almost dreamlike tone.
I want to tell you a story now, Agnes. It may help you understanding. There's an old tale about a woman who lived with a rabid wolf. Each night she would pray the wolf would change, would become gentle. But the wolf's nature was to bite, to hurt. One day, she found a vial of sweet water by her bedside. A gift, perhaps from angels. With conviction, she poured the water into the nightcap of the wolf's dinner that evening, determined to see the results for herself.
He took a moment to let his words sink in before continuing.
The wolf slept peacefully that night, and every night after.
I'm not sure I understand, Father.
The words tumbled from her lips as she tried to grasp his meaning. His story felt like a riddle she wasn't quite ready to solve. She leaned closer to the grating, searching for reassurance before the priest replied to her insecurity.
You will in due time have patience. Remember that God never abandons his children, Agnes. He merely guides their hands. And now for your penance, pray the Miserere Mei Deus, a psalm of repentance and mercy. Return if you need more guidance, child. I'll be here.
That night, driven by guilt, Agnes returned to St. Michael's Church. She slipped inside, removing her black gloves with deliberate care. She passed the holy water font without a glance and offered only the barest nod toward the crucifix. Moonlight filtered through the stained windows, casting bloody shadows across empty pews. Where the church had once bustled with life, now only Agnes's footsteps echoed through its hollow vastness. Each step toward the confessional felt weighted with something more than mere guilt, though whether from dread or anticipation she couldn't say. She hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum before pushing open the door and stepping inside. A rustle of fabric, the creak of the door, and a shadowy figure entered the other side of the confessional booth, barely discernible in the dim light.
Father, forgive me for I have sinned.
Her voice cracked.
It's been 3 months since my last confession.
3 months. In response, the shadow behind the grating waited, patient and still as she forced out her confession.
I thought I was being merciful,
she began.
His sleep was so peaceful at first, just like the wolf in your story. A few drops in his nightcap was all it took, all it should have taken. I thought it would be a gentle passing, a mercy, really.
She swallowed hard, the memory choking her.
Then the darkness came. Not just his usual darkness, Father, something else. Something that crawled out of him like living ink. It poured from his mouth, his eyes spreading across our bedroom floor. And God help me, I watched. I watched until it stopped.
Agnes's attention snapped at a change in the confessional's silence. The priest's breathing had become wet, heavy. He cleared his throat before asking Agnes,
And did you enjoy watching, child? Did it feel like God answered your prayers?
No. Yes, I don't know. It wasn't supposed to be like that. The darkness, it wasn't just coming from him anymore. It was everywhere, on the floor, under the doors, climbing the walls.
A putrid stench suddenly assaulted her nostrils. Through the lattice, something dark and viscous began to seep, the same substance that had poured from her husband's mouth.
Beautiful, isn't it?
The words oozed through the grating that separated Agnes from whatever lurked on the other side, with a guttural tone that chilled her to the bone.
That same darkness that took your husband.
Agnes lunged for the handle, pulling with all her strength, but the door remained sealed, trapping her inside the little confessional boot.
But isn't this what you came for, child? Your absolution.
The priest's laugh was wet, gurgling.
Did you think the sweet water was a gift from angels?
The voice was closer now, a whisper that seemed to come from inside her own head.
Oh, my child, angels don't answer prayers like yours, but I do. I heard every dark wish, every forbidden thought. I was there that night. I watched through your window. I saw how you smiled when the darkness took him, how it called to you.
Agnes threw herself against the door again, harder this time. Her shoulder ached from the impact, but the wood remained unyielding. Behind her, she could hear the dark liquid pooling on the floor, forming a widening puddle that seemed to crawl toward her feet. She shook her head, backing away from both door and grating, trying to find a safe space in the small boot.
Tell me, did you feel it enter you then? Did you feel it guiding your hand as it reached for the widow's throat?
I never, Agnes began, but memories long buried surfaced like corpses in a flood. She was at Thomas's funeral. Widow Shaw had cornered her behind the church, far from the mourning crowd.
I know what you did,
she'd said.
I know what kind of monster you've become.
Agnes could still taste the bitter rage that rose in her throat when Widow Shaw threatened to go to the police. The familiar darkness, the same that consumed Thomas, rising again, moving through Agnes like an independent flow of energy. Later that night, she remembered the satisfaction in seeing in the widow's eyes filled with terror as her life was choked away. The priest's voice did not waver, but his words cut through the darkness like a silver blade.
Did you feel his presence then, Agnes? Or was it mine?
I didn't mean...
And the seamstress?
Agnes's denial died in her throat as she remembered the seamstress's scissors, so sharp, so precise, the darkness showing her exactly where to cut.
She talked too much, didn't she? Couldn't keep her opinions to herself about your sudden change in fortunes. Then we have the banker's wife. How long did you watch her from the shadows, envious of her life of privilege?
New and fresh images flooded Agnes's mind once again. The elegant parties, the respectful nods from townspeople, everything she'd never have. Until the darkness showed her how to take it.
Please,
she whispered. But the word please wasn't a plea for mercy, nor a denial of what she'd done. She was finally understanding.
And finally, the young priest.
The thing that was never truly a priest chuckled.
He saw right through you, didn't he? Noticed how the shadows bent wrong around you during Mass. How your reflection in the holy water rippled with something else. What we'd made you into. He had to be silenced.
A gnarled hand emerged through the grate, its surface flowing like liquid night. But this time, Agnes didn't recoil as the talons gently caressed her cheek, leaving trails of darkness that felt like a lover's touch.
The darkness isn't just coming for you, Agnes. It's claiming what was already promised. What began the night you first welcomed it into your heart.
The darkness flowed toward her, seeking her like a loyal pet. Agnes watched, transfixed, as it embraced her, no longer burning but cooling, soothing, transforming.
Like the wolf in my story.
The voice purred.
Some natures cannot change, but they can evolve.
Through the partition, Agnes caught a glimpse of what waited on the other side. Where the priest's face should have been, there was only a writhing mass of shadows, punctuated by rows of teeth that gleamed like broken glass. But now, in those depths, she saw beauty.
Your husband was just the beginning,
it crooned.
Poor Thomas. How easy it was to whisper to him in his cups, to turn his weakness into cruelty. So many before you had faced similar tests. Wives, daughters, sisters. Most broke under the weight of their suffering. But you discovered your strength in the dark. I knew you would be different. Each death, each soul claimed they were steps toward your true becoming. After all, I did promise to guide you, didn't I?
Agnes would not fight it anymore. She welcomed the darkness now, drawing it in with a deep breath. It tasted of ash and ancient power, filling her with memories of all she'd done and the promise of all she could still do. Through her reflection in the brass crucifix, she watched her transformation, her eyes turning black not with corruption but with terrible purpose. The ancient building shuddered with her awakening, and the church reverberated with voices, the echoes of her victims' last screams, and the cries of those who had yet to experience her touch.
Murderer, betrayer, child of darkness.
Yes.
She replied to them, the word carrying new weight. One by one, the candles in the church began to extinguish themselves, not devoured by shadows, but bowing to a new authority. With each flame that died, she saw figures in the pews, shadows given form. Some wore her victims' faces, but others were like her, transformed beings of darkness waiting to welcome their new sister.
Welcome to your true confession, Agnes.
The demon's voice resonated through her bones, no longer threatening but triumphant.
This is not your punishment. It's your coronation.
Unable to contain what she was becoming, the confessional's wooden walls shattered, sending splinters and shards across the nave. She saw, or better felt, a group of men gathering outside, with lanterns that mere resemble fireflies against her growing power. What was once Agnes rose, at least 15 feet tall, the darkness flowing from her body like a bridal train. Her final prayer transmuted into something older, words that had never been meant for human tongues. The demon's laughter joined hers, their voices twining together in unholy communion.
Show them, my child. Show them what becomes of a wolf when it finds its true pack.
As the police rushed in, Agnes unfurled wings of liquid shadow, each movement leaving trails of flowing darkness in the air. Inspector Morris raised his gun, but it was far too late. 1 week later, Detective James Crawford of Scotland Yard stood in St. Michael's silent nave, studying the black veins that spread across the cold flesh of 8 constables. Their faces were frozen in expressions of awe rather than terror.
Any witnesses?
He asked, knowing the answer even as his junior officer replied.
Just one, sir. Claims they saw a woman in black walking through the church wall, like a black ghost.
The young officer hesitated.
Sir, the marks on their skin, they match the victims in Manchester just 2 days ago.
Crawford nodded, recalling the reports from across England, each death more elaborate than the last, as if the killer was not just perfecting their craft, but evolving into something greater. A sound drew his attention to the confessional booth. As he approached, the temperature dropped, his breath visible in the suddenly chill air, and for a moment he could have sworn he heard a laughter.
And so, dear listeners, we close these haunted pages not with a warning, but with a revelation. For in the depths of confession, some find damnation, and others find their true nature. After all, not all dark prayers go unanswered. Some are simply waiting for the right supplicant. If you dare to delve deeper into these eldritch mysteries, subscribe to our podcast, leave a rating and review, and whisper of our tales to others. Your engagement feeds the book, fueling the terrors yet to come. Until next time, and may your nights be sleepless and your dreams unsettling.